Hi, this is Kylie Coo. Welcome to my studio. So this week I'm going to be making, I suppose it's a kind of grunge nature journal and doing some packaging tape transfers. So this is the type of thing I'm going to be doing, and I'll show you in a moment the materials that I'll be using for it. Now, I think I did say last week that this would be a new prompt this month. We're not into June yet, of course. I made a mistake. I think staying at home as much just now has addled my brain a bit. So anyway, for this, I'm going to need some packaging tape, clear, some pieces from magazines, books, a tray of some description with some water in it. I like to use warm water, but cold will do. Now this particular packaging tape, it is a clear variety. I have struggled to get clear tape. Most of the tape I can find is brown, but I must have found one at some point, so it is possible to get it. I've got an old calendar here. This is the back of the calendar, just showing the various images, main images in the calendar. So I'm going to use some of those, and you could actually use this in a way that if you wanted to make, for example, a diary, you could use the words as well, but I'm not going to do that. So various pieces torn from flyers, magazines, all with that kind of nature theme. And all I'm going to do is a few of these just to give you a demonstration. This is from a book. The piece that I'd already dropped into the water I'd already done, and I just feel there's still a little bit of paper on the back of that. But what I'll do is I'll show you in kind of real time how the exact steps for this, but then I'll speed it up and just show you the rest at speed, because it's more or less the same thing, but it just lets you see how I'm doing it. So there we go. I'm going to cut a piece of packing tape just slightly longer than the piece of paper of the image that I want to actually capture. Now, one of the things I've found anyway is sometimes the packing tape, well, apart from it kind of sticking to itself and getting fingerprints on it, it does have a bit of static in it, and I've noticed some papers almost jump up towards it. So I'm just going to try and go on quite carefully here. Now this first piece, I do end up creasing it, but it's down, I've committed it to the paper, so there's really nothing I can do about that. But to be honest, I am really not concerned, because I don't want this to look pristine. I want it to have a kind of grungy vintage look to it. Now, because my piece of paper is wider than the packaging tape, I'm putting on more than one layer, and this works perfectly well. You will feel the joins a bit when you're cutting, but to be honest, once it's down, you really don't see those lines. So I have put it down on a piece of, I've just used greaseproof paper, which is a bit like deli paper and a bit like tracing paper. I just wanted something that I could then lift it up from, because obviously the packaging tape is sticky. So what I'll do now is I'm just going to take my bone folder and I'm just going to burnish this down. Now there are, as I say, wrinkles in the packing tape where I've stuck it down, but that doesn't matter. I'm still going to just push them down as best I can, but it will affect how the image turns out. And you can sometimes see when there's little bubbles in it. You want to try and get as many of those out as possible, but unless you're going for perfect, I wouldn't worry too much about it. I'll then turn it over and I will burnish it on the other side as well. And this just makes sure that there's a good contact between the image that you want to transfer and the tape. And then it's just a case of popping it into my tray of water. I just use these foil trays. I just use them over and over. I use them for tea dyeing and the likes, and it just means that I've got these kind of dedicated to that. So, moving on. Now I'm going to look at my calendar, and just because I'm just doing some cutting here, I'm just going to put this at speed. As I say, you could cut out the months as well, and you could make a nice kind of diary type thing if you leave that on, but I don't want that. I've mainly just picked the spring flowers here and the robin, although I don't use the robin in the end. Although robins tend to be associated here with winter, I have them in the garden all year round, so robins for all seasons. So just putting a little bit of packing tape down there, same process, making sure that it's well burnished on both sides. Again, I'll turn that over. Now you can make your packing tape a fair bit bigger than your piece that you're doing. You don't have to cut all the packing tape off in the end. I tend to cut most of it off, but that's not necessary. So again, just going over the back, and I'll pop that into my tray of water. These don't take very long before you can start them, but I'm just going to try and get a few done at once and then take all the backings off at once. So for the next one, I am going to use some ordinary sellotape. You might know it better as Scotch tape. And I find that this can work just as well. The sellotape I have is quite narrow, so even for a small image like this, I'm going to need 2 or 3 pieces. I'm just wiping that because my hands were still a little bit wet, and I didn't want, as far as possible, the water to get between the tape and the top of the image. So you'll see I actually end up putting 3 pieces on here. I might have got away with 2, but I've done 3. So doing that in exactly the same way, and then I'll just pop that into the water once I've burnished it. So going over that really well, but I'm just going to show you there are 1 or 2 little bubbles. I will try and push those down, but the likelihood is that that is going to show when I actually take it off. But again, for me, that just gives that kind of distressed grunge look. So quite fine, just the way I like it for the type of journals that I like to make. Having a bit of trouble there with my piece of paper underneath. I perhaps should have taped it down, but that's okay. It's just the tape sticking to it. And I'll pop that in. So again, I'm just going to show you at speed me working through a few more. I've just left it in just so you can see it. If needs be, you could simply slow the video down by using the little gear that's at the bottom of the video. You could almost see where when I was starting to pull the tape up there, the backing was almost coming off it already. Now, this is part of a book page from a vintage book on flowers and trees. You'll see the bit that I did earlier. You can see that it's much more translucent than that top piece, although I did put that bottom piece back in because I felt there was still a slight layer of paper on it. You don't see much there, but you know, I could feel it with my finger, so I did want to try and take a little bit more off. So again, this is a bigger piece, so I'm going to use more than 1 piece of packing tape. I think I'm varying between calling it packing tape and packaging, but I don't suppose it matters. So this can be a little bit of a kind of faff at times, just because, you know, the tape's sticking to everything, but I think it's worth it. You might say, well, why do this? Why not just cut out the images and stick them in the journal? You know, do what suits you best. I like to sometimes do the packing tape transfers just because it gives a slightly different look. Depending on what you make your journal pages from, you can sometimes see some of the background of the journal page through the packing tape transfer, because it does make it that bit more translucent. So I've now got all of those in, and all I do is to move them about in the water a bit. Sometimes they will curl up a bit. That's okay. That's just the paper starting to, I suppose, warp a bit with the water. But I just give them a little slosh around, turning them over. But the main thing is just to make sure that they get a decent soak. So the first one's been in there quite a few minutes now. Really, it doesn't take very long at all. Now, what I didn't lay out at the start was a cloth. You will need some kind of cloth just to dry the images off. And it also helps when you're taking the background. It just helps gather the mess together. So, I'm going to take this first one, and the way I like to do it, some paint on there. I'm just turning over to make sure I don't get paint on this. But the way I like to do it is just to try and peel that first layer off. Now, depending on the paper, it will sometimes come off in a oneer. You can see there was little bits of the image actually coming straight through, straight off, simply because of the crinkling in the packing tape. So I'm just going to try and pull this off. Again, just showing you this at kind of normal speed, just to let you see how I do it. If there's any resist to it, then just rub your finger along it. But I tend to do this in 2 stages. You could keep going with this, but what I do is to try and take that first layer off, and then I'll put it back in water just to soften the next layer. So it's a bit of a kind of slicer, but you know, you will get there in the end. Sorry, I think slicer might be a Scottish word. It's a bit of a mess, but you will get there. So I'm going to pop that back in. Just clear that mess off to the side. Remembering to put that on the end of my tape just now, because I know what it's like when I go for it next time. Now I can't remember if this was one of the sellotape ones, but you'll see this pulls off pretty well as well. You know, that first layer comes off pretty easily. You can still see though that there is a second layer there to come off. There's actually something quite satisfying about this. It's one of these things, one of these projects, it's quite good to sit and do a few at a time, and then just keep them in stock for when you want to use them in future. This might be the sellotape one this time. And really, for me, the sellotape, the Scotch tape, works as well as the packaging tape. It's just simply that if you've got narrow tape, you need more pieces of it. So just speeding this up again, just leaving it in so you can see the process. You'll see that I keep going back and forward to things. Taking off the backing from that old book page, this is actually thicker. You see, just using my finger there to kind of rub it, just rolling it a bit. You know, if it doesn't want to come off just peeling, then just roll your finger across it, thumb or finger. You'll see the two there. You can see how the bottom piece is still much more translucent than that top piece. So I know there's still a fair bit of paper to come off from the back of that. Just having another go at that bottom piece, I could still feel little bits of paper. Now, one of the things, if you rub too hard, you can actually rub right the way through to the packing tape, and you will actually lose part of your image. So you can do this with a cloth if you want. I find doing it with my fingers, I have more control, and there's less likelihood of rubbing too much of the image off. I don't mind rubbing a bit of the image because, again, it gives that distressed look. So even when I've been at things a couple of times, I can generally still take more off. But you'll see with that one that there is some of the colour coming off on the sky there. So if you don't want as much off, just don't rub it quite as much, but you may find that you still have some paper residue on the back, which will mean that it's slightly less translucent. Now, because some of these smaller images actually have a dark background, they're generally going to look less translucent anyway. So having another go at that big piece. And I'm sorry about the sun coming in there. I did actually move my table round a few times. I was closing blinds, opening blinds, moving the table, just to try and keep the sun off my desk. The weather here just now has been pretty amazing, really nice, which has been really good because during lockdown, I've been able to get out in the garden lots. And I should say that because of that, I am way behind in answering comments and commenting on images in the Facebook group, which is the Mixed Media Emporium that I co-host with Nina Ribena. So I'm way behind with comments, but I will catch up, so please bear with me. So here I am, I'm just now starting to cut off the excess tape. Because I like the rough edge on my images, I'm trying not to cut a straight line along the packing tape because I don't want to lose the kind of rough edge of the image. So I just put a little nick in it and then just pull it. Just trimming those little ones off. Decide a better pair of scissors would be to my advantage. There we go. Don't know why I always use those little scissors. So just cutting round that. As I say, you could leave an overhang of the tape if you want to have more of the tape showing in your journal, but I tend to cut most of it off. And you will see that when I come to put these in my journal, I actually adjust them a bit further. But that packing tape around the edge is still sticky, so it will stick to anything that it touches basically. That bottom piece is still a bit more translucent, but I'm not going to do any more with the top piece just now. So, my journal. I have various pages that I had done some eco-dyeing on. Some of these had already been tea stained, and it was really just eco-dyeing them with one or two bits and pieces. That piece has a tear, but I'm going to use that to my advantage. These thicker pieces I just looked at were actually from an old file folder, and the piece I have in my hands now is a piece of Khadi paper, Khadi, also known as cotton rag. Now, I got that from Amazon. A few of you asked me where I got it from when I used it recently. I got it from Amazon. I did do a check, and although I bought mine a couple of years ago, it is double the price at the moment. I think that may just be down to supply issues, so it may come down in price again. I've decided I want that a bit smaller. I just want to make a small journal. I will at a future point ink that kind of white line. This has had various things. Sometimes, if I'm tea dyeing or if I'm doing a bit of eco dyeing and I have some things left over, I'll just throw anything into the tray with the paper and it will just pick up bits and pieces of the colour. I really like this piece. To me, I don't know what it was, but it reminds me a bit of a butterfly, and although it's another thick piece, I'm going to use this in my journal anyway. It's just a bit long, so I'm just going to take that bottom piece off. Just putting a little score in it. I don't want it to be too neat a line, so just tearing it. It is going to be slightly long, wide, but I'm just leaving that. I like that. I don't like my journals to be too neat, too precise. That piece has a bit missing. I don't mind. This is grunge. This is distress, so just the way I like it. But you know, we all have our own tastes, and if your taste is for something a bit neater, then of course you can trim all the edges. You could iron these sheets. Sometimes I do iron my sheets of paper depending on what I'm going to use it for, but for this particular journal I like that kind of organic rusted look to it. So just going to use all these little bits and pieces. They're just going to fit neatly in here. This will be roughly, I think, A6 size, which, what's that size wise? Let me double check and come back to you. So very roughly 4¼ inches by 5¾ inches. So all I'm doing now is taking my awl, pushing it through. The caddy paper and the file folder are obviously quite thick, so I'm having to push quite hard, not measuring it, just one in the centre and one kind of evenly spaced as far as possible each side. Now I have some waxed thread here. I'm just going to do about 2½ lengths of my journal. I know that will fit. I've made these so often. This will give me excess, but it means that I can hold on to the tail while I'm threading it. I run the wax thread through my hands a few times. It just warms up the wax on it and makes it easier to push through. So I'm going to tie this in the centre. So I'm going in the centre hole from the inside, and initially I just have to feed it all the way through. I could have clipped these together and made it a bit easier, but you know, whatever works for you really. Going in through the top now, doesn't matter if you go to top or bottom next. Again, just feeding it through, just a page at a time, pulling that, remembering to go back and check my thread's still there. The tail of the thread still there. Going right the way down to the other end now, to the bottom, pulling that through, and then I'll go back through the centre, and this will go through no problem. I'm making sure it goes to the other side of the thread because I want to tie that across the thread that runs right down the bottom. So just going around my thread, making sure that I've got it taut. You don't want to pull too hard because you can tear the pages. The good thing about the waxed thread is you don't need a third hand to tie the knot. It holds itself in place. You could leave the strings long and put some sort of dangles on them, but I'm just cutting them shorter this time. So I can't remember all the plants that I used in eco dyeing, but you know, I was more just trying to get some bits and pieces on the page. So I feel this little image will sit on the front. I don't like the straight edges. That's just me and what I like. So I'm just putting a little nick in with my scissors and just trying to make those edges just a little bit uneven. Although I'm trying to be careful because I don't want to lose any part of the main image. If it happened, it happened, but it was fine the way it worked out. And you can see there's little bits of the white petals there where I've rubbed the colour off, so it just gives that distress. You can actually see the paper right through it, so it just makes that little bit more translucent. Now I'm just going to use some matte medium today to glue it in place. You could probably use glue stick. The caddy paper is quite textured, so you do want something that's going to bond your top image to the caddy paper quite well. So gel matte medium, PVA. If you have a good glue stick, then that might be sufficient. I'm just going to do this. Just deciding what way I want my image to go. And I might in future write something on the front of this. I might add some more images. But for me, for the time being, this is sufficient. Really liking that page. Just looking at where some of the other images might go. Just going to put this tall one on here. Again, just using the matte medium. Now, I'm not drying these in between. I should really dry them in between, but I'm just trying to hurry to get the project done today. You see I go over the top of it with the matte medium. All I'm doing there more is just trying to press the image down. I will wipe some of that matte medium off in a moment because I don't want it sticking to the next page as I work my way through the journal. Now, this one's a little bit big. I liked this piece of image because it also picked up the text from the book. So it actually says what it is. This had also, I noticed, started to go a little bit wrinkled on the back, so it had a nice distress effect. But I'm looking here and just thinking, well, I want to make the image a bit less even, so I'm just going to cut another bit out of this. Again, just tear it gently. Because I've got one more layer of tape, I've got to do it in a couple of different cuts. But I'm happy with that. And again, I'll just use my matte medium to put that in place. Just checking back, making sure that these are not sticking. So I got up reasonably early to make this. I've not had breakfast yet and my tummy is rumbling away. I don't know if you can hear it. So I guess after I get this edited, I better eat. I did have several cups of coffee though. So again, oh, that's probably too much information, but never mind. Again, I'm just trying to distress the edges a little bit. And it's funny because as much as I like things distressed and try not to fuss over things, there are little things like that where I do get a bit pernickety. So just going to put this big image on at the back. Now, because that's got that big crinkle line right up the middle of it, it's a little bit more difficult to get it to lay flat. So I'm just lifting it and then just trying to do it a little bit at a time. Wiping the excess glue off, but also that helps me push it down and into place. And I did have one page started to stick a little bit there, but we won't worry about that. So just going to make this my final image for sticking down. I'm going to make it smaller, again just giving it an uneven edge to it. And that goes quite well on that piece of caddy paper. So just letting that kind of air dry just for a minute or two while I move some things out the way. And what I've decided now is that piece of paper that has the tear in it, one of the things I like to do, and I did this in I think some of my Torn Pieces journals, is just to use a needle and thread. And believe me, you do not need to be good at sewing to do this, because this is very, well, let's call it rustic. Rough and ready would be another way to describe it. And all I'm going to do is to stitch those two pieces of paper together. I've taken a piece of thread that is a colour that I think will match with a nature journal, and I'm just sewing either side of that tear. And for me, this adds interest, and it's a very practical way of holding the page together. Swithering here about how to finish it, whether we'd go in there or tie it off there. I decided to loop it over that one last time, just over the outside edge of the page. And all I'm going to do now is to put a knot in it. Now you could, for added security of the thread, you could put a bit of glue on it if you want, but I just leave it like this. Just trying to get that knot as close to the paper as I possibly can. And I think that works well. If I'd had a piece for that one that has a big torn corner from it, then I would have sewn that back on. I did have it at one point, but I don't know where it's gone. So just a final quick flip through. So this is my grungy, distressed nature journal using some packing tape transfers and using some eco-dyed papers. So just showing you each page. I will add some more images to this. I might do some writing in it. Plenty of scope to do that. Some of these papers were white when they started, some were a kind of cream, and some were a kind of strange colour. It was a recycled computer paper that was more a kind of grey colour. So they've all taken on kind of different colours. So if you're in the Mixed Media Emporium, I look forward to seeing what you do. And of course Nina will also have a video this week, so I'll leave a link to her video and to the Mixed Media Emporium below. So thanks so much for watching. Stay safe. Bye for now.